Hey everyone, Robert Clinkenbeard with Wilson 360, joined today by Carlos with Team Engine. Thanks for joining us today, Carlos. Cool. Well, let's kick things off here. So, welcome everyone to our monthly Wilson 360 webinar series. We bring in some great experts talking about all different subjects. Again, the goal is to try and help people learn, to educate people, just try and improve the profitability, how our businesses function. So thank you, Carlos, for coming in. The topic today is the need for speed hiring in 2024. Carlos Del Pozo, co-founder of Team Engine. Let's go into the next slide, Arvin. So just a reminder here, some of the services that Wilson 360 offers. These are all our different, we have peer groups, fractional CFO, we have different types of coaching. We have so many different team members. We just added on Sheila Matthews onto our team. She's going to be helping with our sort of our people management. She's worked with UPS, acquisition.com, so really some great companies. So just welcome her onto the team. Going to the next slide, Arvin. Again, this is 360 Plus is our new offering. It's our community program with our existing peer group members, and we've brought on a bunch of new community members. So it's to help, so like a fast track entry into some of our elite peer groups, reduce pricing for online courses, again, special rates for coaching, consulting. It's a whole Slack community where people can join community, can ask questions, bring up topics, look for other company owners to share information such as bonus plans or any other people challenges they're having. So it's a really thriving community. So definitely encourage you all to check that out. Going on to the next slide, as you're aware, I do the Wilson 360 Commercial Landscaper podcast. I think, Arvin, who was or maybe Pam who was our guest this week? Yeah, we do typically weekly guests coming on. They'll spend about 20-30 minutes talking about a topic.
Robert, I'm sorry, I couldn't get off of mute. I have a new technology this week and I'm just adapting to it. So it's Weston Zimmerman is live today. He's this
right.
week's.
Yeah.
How owners struggle with the pricing question. So
Cool. Yeah, that's a pretty good topic there. So thank you, Pam. Sorry for putting you on the spot.
okay.
And then next slide, we have our annual event coming up in Denver. Marvin, I'll get you to switch slides. There we go. So in Denver, the Four Seasons Hotel, Denver, Colorado, coming up quickly. It's July 29th to 31st. This is our 4th year of doing this. We bring in some great speakers. Again, a great way to network with other peer group or other landscape owners. Joe Kujawa is our organizer, does a great job takes it up a notch every single year. So check out this QR code here or go to a website and you can see some of the speakers, see some of the agenda we've developed so far. It's getting close to finalizing the hotel rooms, so I would probably jump on this sooner rather than later. And then jump on to the next slide, Arvin. So here's Carlos, co-founder of Team Engine, a text-first software platform which helps companies in industries like landscaping, construction, manufacturing grow, retain their workforces. Team Engine's customer base expanded over 300% in 2021 by helping companies outcompete in uniquely challenging labor market. Prior to founding Team Engine, Carlos served as infantry officer in the Army and grew up in a small business family in San Diego. He currently lives in Boulder, Colorado. Welcome, Carlos. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Robert. Thanks for having me.
No problem. And just a reminder for everybody, if you have questions, and two things they could do is they can either put their hand up. There's a raised hand feature at the bottom of the Zoom screen, or they could put their questions in the chat and we will read them out as Carlos goes through his presentation. So thank you, everyone.
Great. Well, thanks again for having me, and thanks everybody for showing up, especially with, I haven't updated my profile photo in about 10 years, and my team was giving me a hard time about it. Nobody's going to come listen to, 20-year-old talking about these topics, so I need to update that image at some point. I'm one of the founders of Team Engine. We're a software platform for automation that focuses particularly on recruiting, retention, and employee engagement, with a focus with field workforces, and the green industries being one of our primary industry focuses. Can you all see my screen now, Robert? We get
Yeah.
on the screen?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep,
Awesome.
we can see.
And just to reiterate as we go through, if folks have questions, I want to make sure that I'm talking about the stuff that you all want to talk about. So I have a presentation, plan to cover it, but definitely would love to hear any questions. So what we'll be talking about is the need for speed. And unfortunately, this is going to be the only Top Gun reference made during this presentation, but maybe I'll try to weave in Top Gun or some other film themes in subsequent presentations. The agenda, three kind of main points for the talk today. First, state of the labor market. What does it look like today at a high level? Two, talk about speed and why it's so important in the hiring process. And three, we'll go over some hopefully actionable recommendations for different stages of the process so that you can compress your time to fill and accelerate your hiring velocity. A little bit more context on Team Engine. We work with a number of folks in the green industries and beyond, but a lot of what I'll be talking about is informed by our experiences with employers like the ones you see here, and some of the best practices that we've helped folks develop and then also embedded into our software. So starting with the labor market in 2024. So this is a slide that was presented at the NALP Leader Forum in Mexico, which I was very fortunate to attend this year. And the takeaway here is basically the progression of the ratio of jobs to potential applicants for those jobs over time, starting in 2007. So what you see is the number of unemployed people who are available per job opening in every year since 2007. So you basically see this, big increase, no surprise around the great financial crisis, 2008, 2009 through 2011 kind of time frame. Over time, that big excess of available job seekers in the market erodes down to the point in about 2018, which is about the time when we started this company, when basically that eroded down to the point where there was a one-to-one match of applicants available in the market to jobs that are open. And since then, that ratio has further eroded with a brief and pretty meaningful blip, of course, during COVID, when a lot of folks were laid off and a lot of jobs went away. That ratio kind of rebounded, but it very quickly returned to the long-term trend, which was going down to where we are today. And today, where we're at is there are more jobs than there are applicants to take them. In fact, for every one job that is open, there are 0.716 people that are out of work available to take the job. So, I put this in front of you to kind of give you a context of where we are, but also where we have been. And the main takeaway from this, this chart, which was put forward by ITR Economics, was that we should be expecting a tight labor market for years. And the reason that's the case is that this trend is not the result of some short-term economic cycle. It is the result of demographic changes that are going to take a really long time to reverse if they do. And so the takeaway is that this tight labor market that we're experiencing today may soften a little bit, but it's going to be the predominant theme and what's going to be the case for a long time. Because it's not because of anything political or any economic policy. It's just a fact that reflects the demographics of the country. So with that, I think a lot of folks, hopefully on this call and in general, have come around to understand that this is sort of the new reality. And yet, hopefully this apologies in advance if anybody on this call has said these things or thinks these things, but these are some mindsets that we run into that I think need to change in order for folks to be successful in this market. One thing that I hear somewhat frequently is employers saying, if an applicant really wanted to work, they would wait for my call. And I think in maybe another time that may have been the case when there was a big discrepancy in the number of jobs versus folks to take those jobs. But today, applicants, people actually looking for work have so many options. The fact that they're not waiting around for your call in particular doesn't reflect that they don't want to work. It just reflects the fact that they're not going to wait around for your call. Second, something that I've heard a few folks say is, they experience being ghosted on interviews or having folks fall out of the process. And so they come up with something like requiring candidates to apply in person. And the rationale is that if they aren't willing to come fill out an application, they aren't coming to an interview subsequent to that. Working well so far. And this is a case where I think people go, have a bad experience, they go too far, they decide to front load a whole bunch of friction in the process in the belief that it's going to lead to a better outcome, when really what all it's doing is avoiding some bad outcomes, but it's also avoiding some good outcomes. Third, all applicants must complete a full 60-minute personality profile to even schedule a phone screen. Now, I'm not saying that I have any kind of issue with personality profiles. I think they're a very effective tool and definitely have a great time and place because, honestly, in many ways, culture, personality, potential, those kinds of characteristics can be more important than, some other things. But we run into folks who take those, put them at the front of the process, and while this makes a little bit more sense than requiring somebody to come and apply in person, it has the same effect, which is it's introducing unnecessary and premature friction into the process that actually is going to lead to you losing applicants. And last one, something I hear sometimes is, I scheduled an interview with this applicant 2 weeks ago, and then, interview day came, they ghosted me. They don't want to work. Again, this is the same sort of concept where the fact that they didn't show up for an interview that was scheduled 2 weeks out doesn't necessarily reflect them not wanting to work. It most likely means that they already got a job. If they're a good applicant, they already got a job, they already got somebody got them through the door, got them an offer, and they don't need that interview anymore. And so what we unfortunately see, many times with employers is that they may have these bad experiences like getting ghosted or, having folks fall out in the process, and they end up designing their process as a reaction to those bad experiences. So they end up designing the experience and the process around the bad candidates rather than designing the process around the good candidates. So they end up, yes, reducing the number of bad candidates that they see come through, but they also, the impact is not equally distributed between good candidates and bad candidates. It's just candidates. And so actually, I would say in many cases, the biggest impact of some of that unnecessary friction falls on the good candidates who you end up losing. So to talk about the good candidates, what is the context? What is their experience? That should inform how we approach things. First, again, going back to that ratio, they have options. Especially for some of these roles that are have pretty scarce talent available for them, there can be just a ton of jobs available in different geographies that folks can go through and apply to. So they have a lot of options. And then when they go and apply to those options, they also have pretty immediate action being taken. They have folks picking up the phone and calling them, texting them, getting in touch with them, trying to get them through the door, even if you're not. So not only do they have a lot of options, but they also have a lot of engagement. And just to kind of boil it down to something essential, like thinking about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which basically sort of stacks the priorities of different needs and different things that people want. At the end of the day, safety needs, physiological needs, things like getting a paycheck so that you can, support your family, those trump other things like that, are very important, but need to come in addition to the basic things. So things like culture, a team, opportunity, long-term opportunity, that kind of stuff. Those are all really important things and essential, but they need to be in alignment with the basics. And one of the basic things to think about is, from the perspective of an applicant, they're in many times thinking about what's the shortest distance between me and my paycheck. And a big signal around that distance being short is the velocity of communication and engagement and action and progression in the hiring process. Another thing to keep in mind is, as employers, we all have the experience of, having people ghost us and having these negative experiences, but that is also true of applicants. They have also had the experience where they've gone through processes only to not hear back. They've been asked to fill out a personality profile early in the process, done so, not heard back. And so it's important to keep in mind that they also have negative experiences, which have probably jaded them about the process. And lastly, again, thinking about the full context of all the different jobs they're applying to, they probably have some more promising signals of folks that have gotten in touch with them quickly, engaged with them, shown interest, demonstrated an intent to actually fill a role, and communicated to them that they actually have a legitimate chance to be in that position. So those are all just, thinking about this from a perspective of trying to be empathetic to the experience of applicants. But to go a little bit deeper and talk about some of the data behind this. So from a survey of candidates in 2023, the top 3 reasons cited by candidates for them not taking a job or not continuing with the process: 1, time being disrespected due to poor communication; 2, the process taking too long; 3, salary not meeting expectations. And one thing to call out about this is, of the top 3 reasons why folks withdraw from hiring processes, only one of them has to do with pay. 2 of them have to do with velocity and communication. So if you think about your hiring process and your outcomes, and you think about the ways that you could get better candidates, get better results, and you think about all the different levers you could pull, higher pay, investing more in employer brand, improving your careers page, that kind of stuff, or moving faster. Moving faster is something that you can go and do today, doesn't require a whole lot of lead time to see the impact of it, and also doesn't require a whole lot of investment to make it happen. And just a couple other quick learnings from that survey: the highest rated employers disposition or basically advance candidates in the process within 3 to 5 days. This is a pretty broad survey, and so I think that time frame is actually on the high side. 3 days, I would say, is sort of the maximum that you want to wait to be advancing your candidates if you actually want to have a shot. But I think this survey, because it has a wider cross section in terms of geography and types of jobs, it makes sense that it would bias a little bit higher. But in these industries, 72 hours is kind of the max that we would say is acceptable for engaging and advancing folks to the next stage. And second, a majority of the top-rated employers in the survey, turns out they use some sort of text-based communication and recruiting system in order to engage their candidates, because it's an effective way of getting in touch with folks and advancing them in the process. I'll pause real quick. Let's see. Any questions so far?
Hey, Carlos, I have a
Sure.
question.
Yes, sir.
One of the things I've seen, I suppose in the past, is that usually the HR person is the one who's given the task of trying to find people,
Yep.
and they, knowing their challenge, their priority or their fires are typically dealing with HR issues, employees issues that come up. So, and unfortunately, recruitment almost gets put in the back burner.
Yep.
Do you see that? I mean, I think a lot more companies
yeah.
are moving more and more towards having a dedicated recruiter, almost seeing it as a sales
Yeah.
type,
Yep.
position. What do you
Yep.
see out there? And that's what's happened in the
Yeah.
past, what the shift is?
Yeah, it's definitely true. One of the interesting things about recruiting, to your point, and one of our perspectives in general is that recruiting, is sales. It's just, a different funnel, a different desired outcome. It's interesting that recruiting in so many cases gets put with HR because actually, it is a people oriented activity, but in so many ways, like the, ingredients for success of it and the sort of like dynamic of the work is quite different. Um, and frankly, I think that's where we, as a company, we end up adding a lot of value because so much of what we do is around the automation of those hiring activities, so that a company can still have, an HR person responsible without having to layer on a dedicated recruiter. But
Right.
also, we have a lot of recruiters using us. But um, that is definitely an issue that we see. Definitely see folks realizing that they need a dedicated person focusing on it in order to be competitive. It's tough to say just like how widespread it is, but the bigger companies and some of the ones that are more successful, they tend to not only have a dedicated recruiter, but they tend to also have a dedicated frontline recruiter because the dynamic of the field workforce in particular is so different in terms of just like what the process, the funnel looks like, and even like language requirements might
Yeah.
be like. So if you can specialize, you want to, but it comes down to, a resource question.
Right. Yeah, and even to your point regarding almost like as a sales role, I mean, typically in sales, you have to get back to people pretty quickly,
Yes. Yep.
24, 48, 36 hours. So same type of response, to
Yeah.
get clients or even candidates while it's still hot.
Yeah. Yeah. Like one of the things I recommend folks do is that they can just think about, if they can just think about recruiting and hiring as as a sales problem, if they think about what are the principles of sales that to be true, that are important for success, and you use that lens applied to recruiting to sort of evaluate how you're doing things, I think it'll be like pretty eye-opening for you. So to your point, one of the main concepts in sales is just speed to lead. Like you have a lead come through website, somebody requesting a conversation, that clock is ticking, and the best teams in terms of sales, they measure that, they pay attention to that. But I think if you went and looked at the same companies where there's a fundamental constraint around growth that comes from having the people to actually deliver the work that they're selling, in many cases, I don't think you would see them paying as close attention
Right.
to that number.
Cool.
But if they did, I think that would be a big unlock.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you, Carlos.
Yep.
Anybody else have any questions? Can feel free to put them in the chat, raise your hand. Carlos is ready and waiting for some testing questions.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a few spicy slides on here, so if there's any spice in the audience, I'm definitely open to it. Okay. I will move on. So taking all that perspective, what are the benefits of velocity for employers? The first is, simply just better hires. The best, most qualified folks are going to get hired really fast. And so it's a race. Who can get in front of them the fastest with, a compelling proposal, a compelling opportunity, and again, demonstrate that distance between, them and a paycheck is short and the shortest. Uh, Again, going back to like what are all the levers that you can pull in order to have better outcomes, just being faster than other folks means that you're going to have a better shot at the best folks who come through. Second, a faster process, going back to the disappointed panda gif, a faster process just means better efficiency and time utilization for your team. The faster you get interviews scheduled, the faster you get people coming through, the less likely you are to see no-shows, folks accepting other opportunities, falling out of the process. So again, going back to like sales, time kills deals. Well, time also kills hiring processes. And so just by being faster, you're more likely to have a successful outcome with a particular candidate.
Carlos, I know we have a question here from
Sure.
Eric. How do you deal with hiring managers who are slow to give feedback?
Sure. That's definitely a major challenge in this, and I have if you'll allow me, I'm going to directly address that in some of my suggestions. Um, so if it's okay, I'll cover that when I get to those slides. But awesome, yeah, very important question. Okay, so another benefit is just reducing time to fill means you have to invest less in filling. You end up having to spend less time, which time is money, and spend less money on things like job sponsorship to generate applicants. Um, and in sort of a most expensive case scenario, you can avoid things like having to go to costly alternatives, like having to get a headhunter or some third party to fill a role that you potentially could have filled yourself. Now, for just different types of roles, it is very important in some cases and very valuable to use a third party, but for many roles that are not so specialized, you should be able to fill those yourself and avoid that cost. And thinking about the impact in terms of the employees and the team, as well as the bottom line, still reducing time to fill, being faster and more efficient at filling roles reduces overtime hours for your team, which is a direct financial cost, but it also reduces the risk of overwork impacting your team, causing turnover, which can be quite expensive. And to think about by the numbers, trying to distill them down as much as possible, our rough rule of thumb for the daily cost of vacancy of a role is basically 200% of daily pay. So that's impact of things like overtime, unutilized overhead, potentially like labor hours missed out on. So that can add up. And when you think about the cost of turnover, you're now thinking about all the costs that you invested into hiring somebody, getting them trained up, paying them, not getting them to the point of productivity. So there's all the costs of those lost costs of that new hire, plus the cost to replace them, which is that daily cost times the number of days it takes you to replace them, which can really add up, even for entry-level roles. So hopefully we got some folks who feel the need for speed and want to know how they can achieve it based off of all the benefits and why this is so important. So let's talk about that. So thinking about the ways that you can unlock more velocity, we'll think about them sort of in like the stages of the process, starting with sourcing. And one of the first things that you can do on the sourcing side is from day one, trying to cast a really broad net. So you're not starting with like posting a job and then going, a few days later, oh, I don't have enough applicants, going to go post this other place. I don't have enough applicants, going to ask for some referrals. Maybe I'll, a few days later dig in, get some candidates that might have applied in the past. The way that we recommend folks go about this is from day one, you do as much as you can as possible so that you start with the best, biggest group of applicants that you can review, screen, whittle down, and hopefully get your role filled as soon as possible versus dragging it out longer than it needs to be. And another thing that we recommend, and again, this depends on sort of your business and the role and whether this is realistic or not, but to the extent that we recommend just always be hiring. Don't turn jobs off and on depending on whether you're fully staffed or not. What we recommend doing before you do that is adjusting your pickiness around the roles. So rather than saying, I'm no longer like hiring for this role, say, I don't have as much need or urgency to fill this role. I'm going to get more selective about who I would consider for this role. So rather than you having to focusing on trying to backfill an opening or get somebody into a position, you are looking for opportunities to up-level your team. And you're having a continuous kind of flow of applicants come through so that if you do get into a position where you actually need to fill that position, again, you're not starting from scratch. You already have applicants who you could be considering to fill that role. And for many of these roles, and for y'all's companies, in many cases, it's more likely than not that you're going to end up having to backfill somebody or hire for a role sooner than you might expect. Second, in terms of once you've got those applicants come through, we really strongly recommend immediate outreach to applicants. So the way that we recommend folks approaching this is any applicant that meets a bare minimum on paper threshold for qualification should be contacted, because there's going to be some reduction in the number of those applicants that's actually available once you reach out to them. And so you want to make sure that you're getting in touch with everybody possible, whether they're the best candidate or not. Anybody who appears to be eligible for the role should be contacted, so that you are one of the first people through the door in their job search that they are paying attention to. They know who you are. They know that you are serious and thinking about them. And then one of the recommendations that's a little bit more tactical that we recommend is, in this outreach, we recommend doing it over text because it's the most effective format. And then we recommend ending that text, where you're saying, hey, Robert, thanks very much for applying for this role. You end that text with some sort of question that can be a screening question that you might ask on a phone screen call or in an interview. If you can move that question to the text, it'll allow you to get more context on the candidate to prioritize them, but also to potentially screen them out without having to invest time in scheduling a phone screen, scheduling an interview. So it has a benefit of increasing your conversion rate on those applicants and improving the efficiency of your screening. So this is getting, Erica, to your question. And what I would suggest, one thing that you could consider is basically trying to get as much of the feedback responsibility away from the hiring managers as possible. And I know that can feel like a big ask, and it's definitely depends on what's the organizational context you're in. But ideally, everybody is aligned as much as possible, as objectively as possible earlier on in the process, on what a good candidate looks like, so that you don't have as much of the responsibility on next steps resting with the hiring manager. You can have more of that responsibility resting with somebody else who is doing the screening, doing the resume review. And one of the sort of tactics that I recommend for this is, rather than starting at the beginning and sort of coming up with what you think what you're going to agree the requirements are for a role, is that you actually have some resumes that you can put in front of those hiring managers and get their feedback on them for not actual candidates. So you can try as much as possible to calibrate just what exactly is being expected of this role. So give them 5 maybe past resumes, or today you can use AI generated resumes to put in front of them with different characteristics, have them react to them, so you can really dial in to understand what they actually expect. Does that approach make sense?
Yep, I like it.
Because I think in many cases, the reason that this ends up being a source of friction is that a hiring manager might think that they have some sort of they might think that the resume review is more art than it is science, when in fact it is there is a science behind their art. And so it's tough to really surface that by just asking, oh, what are you looking for? Because you end up getting stuff that's not necessarily the actual answer. Oh, they need to have 2-3 years of experience in this role. Well, really, what does it mean in most cases when somebody says they need to have 2 or 3 years of experience? It means that there's some skills, skills or specific equipment or processes that they're familiar with. But those are hard to really suss out. So people just say they need 2-3 years of experience. But if you take examples, put them in front of somebody, have them react to them, that can actually surface what they're looking for a little bit better. And in case you want to go do this through AI, I have an example of how you can generate some fake resumes for a role, and I'm happy to share this. You may send out an email or some other ways so folks can benefit from this as well. And in terms of assessment, again, thinking about just speed, I would really encourage folks to, aim for not getting an interview scheduled within 7 days, but actually having it held within 7 days of the applicant applying. Because, again, time kills deals, time kills, hiring decisions. And so you want to really push for having folks come through the door as soon as possible to get a decision. And 7 days is sort of, a benchmark. And again, that's something else that sounds great, but can be hard to do. And the reason it can be hard to do is you have an applicant come through, you want to schedule with them, you have their availability, and now you have to wait on somebody else to figure out what their availability is. And so, if you can get alignment in the business that getting better hires and staffing, getting fully staffed is important, you can get alignment for setting aside specific times in the week when folks on your team are going to be expected to be available if you can get an interview scheduled. So rather than trying to get an applicant and then trying to get a time when you can schedule them, make sure that you have the time when you can schedule applicants before you get the applicants coming through. And then one note here is somewhere around this stage is when I would say it starts to be reasonable to introduce a personality profile. And the reason is as you go along in this process, again, we don't want to be front loading a whole bunch of friction, but we do want to be getting information that's important for making a decision. And at this point, it's sort of an appropriate level of mutual escalation of commitment. They're going to put a lot of time in, but they've also seen that you've put a lot of time in to them. And so this is a reasonable time to start thinking about asking them to complete one of those surveys, either before or after an interview. And then the last thing that I'll propose is,
Hey, Carlos,
sorry.
we have another quick question here. Eric
Sure.
is asking, how valuable are personality assessments or surveys when it comes to making a final decision on a candidate?
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't say that I'm a big expert on this. I definitely see the value of them. I think it sort of is an internal decision. A lot of organizations swear by them. A lot of other organizations don't. The main thing that I would just say is I'd be really thoughtful about, what you all believe the value of it is, and then be really thoughtful again about where you introduce it into the process, because you just want to avoid any unnecessary source of friction, anything that doesn't actually with high confidence contribute to a better hire. I definitely, know a lot of folks who I really respect who really believe in them, but then I've also seen a lot of people succeed without them. And then you could also think about, just applying them to particular roles if you want, where you think they make the most sense. So there's just unfortunately, I don't have a strong recommendation. There's also not necessarily one best answer for everybody.
Yeah, I've got a quick comment on that, Carlos, if that's okay.
Of course.
We do personality assessments, and I think certainly I feel as though they're pretty important, especially on salary type positions. Just another set of data in which you can help make the decision. I think you have to be careful on, as you say, what stage of the process. Do you do everybody coming in, or is it when you get down to the final 3 candidates, and then you could use that data from the assessment? There's so many great ones out there, Culture Index and Myers-Briggs and stuff like that. But I think just making sure you're consistent in the level in which you introduce them in the process. I think you can sometimes get into an HR issue if you're picky about who you assess. But yeah, it's nice having that data.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. And we definitely think it internally as an organization. We have used them internally. We just don't use them in our hiring process. So believers in them, but use them in a slightly different way. Okay, on this slide, this isn't so much having to do with speed, but the last thing that I would really strongly recommend that folks do is that you not be one of the 36% who don't provide feedback. One way or another, it's very important to provide feedback, whether it's a good news or it's that you're not going to hire somebody. And the reason here is that, if you think about like your market and the labor market for your business, which is going to be local, it's reasonable to think that, word will spread in terms of what people's experience is as a candidate applying to your jobs. And so, that sort of employer brand is something that's important to preserve. And so I would just strongly recommend that folks provide feedback one way or another. Okay, and then the last stage here is onboarding, retention, and the one thing that I want to call out is that this funnel, it starts at sourcing, it ends at onboarding. But the important thing that people take away, which is not depicted here, is that recruiting is continuous. It doesn't end once you get somebody to sign an offer, show up for the first day, still employed 30 days later. You need to continue to invest effort and have a plan in keeping them on board and making sure they're successful. But that's a presentation for another day. So a couple quick takeaways, just if you walk away with nothing else from this. At a high level, design your process with your best candidates in mind, not your worst. Optimize for getting the good candidates and having the good experiences with candidates. Do not optimize for avoiding the bad experiences. Second, escalate commitment mutually. So, things that you want people to do in the process as applicants that may be time consuming, like a personality assessment, definitely appropriate, makes sense. Just make sure you're doing it in the right place. And lastly, just to focus on speed to lead, find ways to get back to folks quicker, get them in the door sooner, get them a paycheck before anybody else can. And that is my presentation. So if there's any other questions, happy to answer this now.
Awesome. Thank you, Carlos.
Sure.
No questions in the chat right now, but so we have about 10 minutes left. So if anybody wants to put their questions in the chat or even come off mute and ask your question live, that's always nice. We did put your resume prompt in the chat, so that is there, Carlos.
Great.
Carlos, I'm curious, do you involve other team members in the process? And where do you insert that kind of, this is the team you'll be working with? And
Oh, yeah, so that's an interesting question. I think we've seen folks try to approach the hiring process, including some kind of, and I would sort of bucket this under something like a try before you buy kind of a dynamic. Like, how can we get them exposure to the team, but then also get the team exposure to them, and just like try to provide as much transparency and clear expectations and making sure they know what the job is going to be like. We've seen folks, involve that in the process. I think that can be useful when you are finding that you're hiring folks who, uh, are struggling, are like basically taking a job and leaving very soon after they start. So there's like some misalignment in terms of expectations. The classic one sort of, in these industries and other similar ones is, somebody who hasn't done, you know, worked outside before or, hasn't recently. And so giving them some exposure to like the actual activity can be helpful. But again, that's another like source of friction potentially, and also risk by putting them in front of the team. So I would only introduce it when it's intended to solve a clear and compelling problem.
thank you.
Oh, I think that is all the questions we have, Carlos.
Sure.
Really appreciate you doing a great presentation, a lot of great nuggets in there. Thank you again for being a strategic partner of Wilson 360. We look forward to seeing you in Denver in
Appreciate that.
a couple of months.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, and if anybody, I'm happy to be helpful, even just answering tactical questions, or hey, I'm having this, issue, what has been helpful for other folks in similar kind of situations or, dynamics. don't hesitate to reach out. Very available.
Cool, thank you. We do have our next event coming up, just pulling up the date here. It's on June 27th. We're going to be talking about how to train your second in command. Johanna Lee is going to be a presenter there. So again, mark your calendars. There'll be more details that come out for that. But again, Carla, I really appreciate your sharing your knowledge today, and hopefully people realize they need to improve their speed and just jump on that, making that recruitment process a little bit more of a priority.
Hope so, and if I can be helpful in helping them do it, I hope they reach out.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for attending our Wilson 360 webinar today. We look forward to seeing you in future ones, and feel free to reach out to Carlos or Dara, and they'll be able to help you just introduce some of the services that Team Engine provide. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.